at Parchment. The words of the judge echoed in the courtroom, which had erupted in pandemonium at the reading of the verdict and sentence. May God have mercy on your soul, the judge had said. If only he knew I had no soul. At 16 years of age, with only 6 weeks to live, what what could I do to merit God's mercy? In 4 years, I had become a thief, an alcoholic, a drug abuser, and now a convicted murderer. The court's decision to terminate my existence was a just and fitting final to the shambles of my life. I will welcome death. I will welcome death embrace. For me, there will be no bomb in Galilee, no rest beyond Jordan. If there was a God, then if there was a God, I could only look forward to hell and damnation. No honor, no your honor. May God have mercy on your soul. Today in the studio, we have no other than the remarkable author, Mr. Karl A. Wansley. Karl A. Wansley is a husband and father of four. He holds a Associate of Arts degree from Kalahoma Junior College in Clarksville, Mississippi, and has a Bachelor's of Art degree in psychology from Rusk College in Holly Springs, Mississippi. He has a postgraduate studies in theology from the Methodist Theological School in Delaware, Ohio, and the United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. Karl is a motivational speaker and self-published author of his autobiography, Journey to Manhood. He resides in Jackson, Mississippi, where he writes and counsels with juveniles and adults on the consequences of drug and alcohol abuse. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Bavein House Show. Today we're talking about a journey into manhood. And no other want to go in and get into it that today's show want to talk about Mr. Karl. Want to say good morning to the listeners for this morning?
Good morning, everyone.
So we want to dive right into the show because one of the things I always say that I am my brothers and my sisters keeper. And basically that God gives us platforms such as this to be able to shine light on a person's life. Like you are actually in the flesh. You're giving your flowers now. Why are you alive? Your life was, as we have spoke on this week, reminding you of Moses, biblically speaking. When you want to get into it, tell us a little bit about your background and what happened.
Well, I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. As a child, I wanted to. I knew what my life's goals were.
Okay.
I wanted to be a minister, and if I couldn't be a minister, then I wanted to be a marine biologist. Thanks to the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau.
Okay.
Childhood was really not that bad for me. I had loving parents in the home, siblings who loved me, and I decided to pursue my career because I wanted to grow up and be a minister. I loved church, and the only place that I loved second to church was school. I loved going to school. I loved learning. There was a tragic event that occurred in my life when my mother and father divorced due to my father's alcoholism.
How old were you?
At the time of the divorce,
Yes.
8 or 9.
Okay.
And so I started living with my mother. She eventually got remarried. But at the age of 11, my mother passed, and I had to move in with Dad. And I don't know if you have the experience, and I hope you haven't, living in an alcoholic household. It's not a very pretty sight. So at the age of, I started using drugs, drinking, to escape the reality of my home environment. Mm-hmm. And at 16, I got to the point where, well, actually 15, I knew that something had to change. But at that age, too young to work, too proud to beg, using drugs and alcohol, I decided, some friends and I decided that we would rob a store in our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Family-owned store in the neighborhood, about 3 streets from where I lived. And as it turned out, my first armed robbery would be my last. That morning, when I went in the store,
Did you know the people?
Oh yeah, I knew I knew them well. I mean, not personally, we didn't talk or anything, but because it was a neighborhood store, I would go in there all the time and purchase things. And you have to remember, I was a very small kid, malnourished, underfed, raggedy, dirty because of my home environment. But when I
How did it
went,
make you feel being, just a minor, being 16 years old, and having to go through great lengths? Because there's a lot of youth out there that, in order to make it, you get into drugs, into selling drugs, get into doing things that, if the tables were turned and there was in a functional environment, that would not have been a choice.
well, I have actually visited homes, and one of the reasons I wrote the book that I wrote, I have been in homes. I've talked to the young people, and there's no, I don't have an organization. I don't have a group behind me, so it's basically just me going, seeing the need, and trying to fulfill that need. And I have actually went in homes, and I have seen kids who are living the way that I live. No food, utilities are not paid. There's this one particular young man that I dealt with years ago. He was 14, and he had two younger sisters. His mother was on crack, and she was on food stamps. She was getting, assistance from the state. But every month, the drug dealer would take her to pick up her food stamps. It was back when they had the paper food stamps. And he would take her to get her food stamps because she already owed it all to him. So this young man, and I talked with him, and I asked him, I said, well, Chris, why are you doing this? He said, well, Carl, if I don't do something, my sisters are going to starve. So trying to get him to not sell drugs, which is what he was trying to do. If you don't have an alternative for them, what can you do? So I've seen that, and being at the age, just about the age I was, going through the same things, it touched my heart. And I said, well, what can I do? I did the best that I could at the time. I would invite them over to the house, feed them, and talk with them and say, man, there is a better way. But I didn't have anything to offer him. I didn't have a job to give him. And it's hard to deal with a young man, and there are a lot of them like that now who are suffering the way that I suffered. But what's hurting and sad is that people in the community can see this. But we've gotten to the point now where we're so afraid of our children that we lock our doors when we see them coming, grab our purses and hold them, clutch them to us. And the young people are feeling this. They see this. And I think they beginning to believe that no one cares. And you have to ask the question, what do you think people do who think they have no hope, that no one cares about them? And that's the situation that I was in from the time my mother died until I actually committed the crime and got arrested.
How did you feel when, being 16, you walking into the store, and what was going through your mind the day of that event?
Well, to be honest, I was so high that morning that it's really sort of a blur to me.
Okay.
But I can remember when I walked in the store, because there was a young man in the neighborhood who was older than I was, and then there were four of us who actually committed the crime. But one of them had sort of semi-adopted me. And I was no longer being beat and slapped around by the other kids in the neighborhood. He saw to that. And when I went in the store, because when they gave me the gun, first of all, I'd never committed a crime in my life. I wasn't raised that way, and even though I was going through some of the things that I was going through, I knew that this was wrong. And when I walked in the store and saw this elderly couple, and I said, man, this is wrong. But the pool of what would happen if I didn't go through with it. Would my friend stop taking care of me? Would I go back to near the starving to death because he would feed me? The pull and the fear of what might happen if I didn't go through with it was more powerful than the desire and the knowledge that what I was doing or about to do was wrong.
Was this an intent to go in there to rob them? It wasn't an intent to go in there to kill them?
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, my indictment even read without willful design, which in legal terminology means that he didn't intend to kill them, but it was a byproduct of me going in the store. Had I not gone in the store, then, it would have been a moot point. But when I walked in the store and actually saw them, I blacked out. I don't know whether I went into shock, and the only thing I can remember is hearing the popping sound of the gun as it went off. And when the popping sound stopped, I came back to my senses, and I looked and saw that I had murdered two people. And had not my friend coming to the store, because they sent me in by myself. Of course, I was the youngest, and this is what they told me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're the youngest, nobody's going to suspect you, you go in. When they had not my friend come into the store, I would have been standing there with the gun in my hand when the police arrived, in a state of shock.
And from that point, just being there, if you return back to realization that, hey, you know, I've done something, that from that point on and having to, did you turn yourself in and then have to go to court? Where were you at mentally? Because I mean, you're just 16 years old, just a baby.
Mentally, I was drained. I was empty. When I left the store, the only thing I could remember saying as I ran out of the store was, my God, why has thou forsaken me? I was not brought up this way. This is not what I wanted to do. I knew what I had done was a horrendous act. And I was in shock for the rest of the day. And actually that evening, police finally found us and arrested me. And when they pulled the door open of the car that we were in, for the first time in a long time, I was at a complete calm.
Mm.
Finally, I knew what was going to happen. I'm going to prison. I'm going to be there for the rest of my life. This is all in the space of a couple of seconds. But there was a sense of relief that this horrendous way that I was living, the horrible way that I was living, was about to be ended.
Mm. So when that point, when you went to court, so what was going on? I think at the time you were 16 years of age.
Correct.
And what was so travel us through the journey, because you're sitting before me, a free man.
Praise
So,
God.
I ain't nothing to it. So let the listening audience know, so when you went to court, what happened then? You go before the judge, what they say?
Well, when I went to court, before actually going to court, I knew that the district attorney was going to seek the death penalty in my case. It's amazing when you sober up, you think about all the things that you could have done.
Mm-hmm.
There were people that I could have contacted. There were family members who I could have called or contacted and said, hey, I'm starving. I'm not eating. Dad is not taking care of me. My clothes are always dirty. No one is washing. Bills are going unpaid. We're being evicted. Furniture is being put out in the street. There were people that I could have gone to. And as I sat in jail those 4 months actually before I went to court, I thought about all of the decisions that I had made that had led me to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But there were for every decision that I made, there were 10 decisions that I could have made. There were things that I could have done. But once you commit the crime, then it's too late. The Karl that I was as a child began to reemerge in the county jail, but it was too late. You know, the deed had been done, and now there was only the consequences to look forward to.
So we went before the judge. What was going through your mind?
That I'm getting ready to die.
So your first sentence, they had you on. You was on the death. You was on.
I was on death row for a little over 3 years, right at 3 years.
On death row for a little over 3 years. Okay. And so what happened between you being on death row to take us through the journey of your, because you right here, to me, you are the living book. So going from being on death row, how did you feel at that moment when the judge slammed the little gavel and they said you have
3 weeks to live? What went through my mind was, actually, I'm going to hell. I'm going to die and go to hell. I've committed this horrendous crime. I'm in prison. There is nothing that I can do that will justify, in my mind, God sending me to heaven. So I began to study the scriptures in hopes that maybe just, drowning man would reach for a straw.
Mm-hmm.
And at that particular point, I was drowning. And I reached for the straw that was there, which was reading the scripture, hoping that I would find some way, something that I could do, some form of forgiveness, so that I would not be condemned to eternal damnation.
So what happens between you being at death row, and what was the next step? Like when you went for this, I mean, because I don't know too many people other than watching like Shawshank Redemption or The Green Mile, just from what's on television. How were you able to go from death row to?
Well, when I was sentenced, there was only the crime that I was charged with was capital murder.
Okay.
And at the time I was sentenced, there was only one sentence for capital murder, which was death by gas. The United States Supreme Court ruled that statute was unconstitutional because there are cases in mitigating circumstances. What would happen with the statute that was in place at the time was if say you and I committed a crime, and when we got ready to commit the crime, you said, no, Carl, I don't want to have anything to do with this. But because you were with me and I go in and commit the crime, both of us would have had to receive the death sentence. So the United States Supreme Court changed the statute, and they allowed for 2 sentences for capital murder. One was death by lethal gas, and the other would be life in prison. So when the statute was changed, because again my indictment read without will for design.
How old were you then when the statute when that change was made? How much time had you already spent?
I had spent about 2 years. I was about 18 then.
18, okay.
So when the statute was changed, they offered me an opportunity to either go back to court, because my attorneys had appealed the case, and they offered me the opportunity to either go back to court, which I knew I was guilty. There was no doubt about that. I had signed confession. They gave me an opportunity to either be retried and possibly resentenced to death, or to plea bargain for life in prison. And I chose to plea bargain for life in prison.
Okay, so at being 18 years old, at this time you're 18 years old, you're still a minor, you're still a young whippersnapper.
Right.
And you're being sentenced to life in prison. At that moment, because I know me, it been over. I've been in some institution somewhere gone, so at that moment when they told you that, how did you feel now? It's just the fact that, where were you at mentally? What state were you in?
Well, I'd had a couple of years to read, to study. Okay. And given the life sentence, I said there's a possibility, with the possibility of parole too, by the way. I said, well, there's a possibility, slim though it might be, but there's a possibility that one day I would be free again. And at that particular point, like I said, the Carl that I was when I was young had reemerged. All the good teachings that my mother had given me, my grandmother had given me, things I had heard in church began to come back to me, and I wanted that type of life. So when I received the life sentence, I said, well, I do have an opportunity now. But the drawback to that was I was still in prison, and I was still young. And even though we've heard horror stories about things that go on in prison, most of the inmates that I encountered while I was locked up had one thing on their mind: I want to get out. And it's not the movies that we see.
What year was that?
This was 89. Wait a minute, get my dates right. Probably around 79.
Okay.
And even though we see these movies where there are all of these horrible things that happen with inmates, that's really not the way it is. Most inmates just want to get out. But there is a perception about inmates that we're all violent, that we're all killers, that we would do anything, and people are being raped and killed. But the thing is, if you put, you ever heard those saying, one bad apple?
Yeah, because I know when I was working for TDCJ in Texas as a correctional officer before becoming a chaplain, you had the inmates with those little rascals, those that like you said, stayed in trouble.
Right.
And then I forgot the name, what they call those, like you said, want to just get in, do their time, and go on. Because being inside of a prison, it is a whole different world, a whole different culture.
Yes, it is.
And you have to pick your battle. So I was just sitting here thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, if you take 2 or 3 truly sociopaths and you mix them in, the perception is that they're all that way. And I was no exception. Even though I was incarcerated, I was living the life of an inmate. Even I was afraid. Now, I tried to hide that with everything that was in me, and even though I wasn't being harassed or bothered, the idea and the possibility that it could happen. Because when you're put in an open environment on death row, I was in a one-man cell. But when you're put in general population, you are just in the mix with everybody, and you don't really ask what you're in here for. You accept people as they are. We know you're in here, and that's good enough. But there were the 1 or 2 who were continuous troublemakers.
Did you have to fight or anything like that while you was incarcerated?
I had to fight, but it wasn't because people bothered me. My fear was always getting me in trouble. I believed in the philosophy of do unto others before they do unto you. At the size that I was at the time, I always felt at a disadvantage. So there were things that I did that I thought were necessary for survival inside prison walls. And it was years before I began to actually grow up and mature and realize I don't have to live this way. Because I had become that which I feared. I had become the inmate that always got in trouble, always was in maximum security. But the reason for me doing it was because I was afraid that if I didn't do it, then you would consider me weak. And that's the last thing you want to be considered in prison is weak.
So you're 18 years old, and then so you go up, they give you, what age were you able to get the plea bargain to have life in prison?
I was about 18, 19 years old at the time, yeah.
And so what happened then to lead to you, how many years have you served, did you have served that point before you were able to go for parole?
I did 11 and a half years in Parchment.
Okay. So how was the prison, just a little bit of that environment, I'm not familiar with Parchment. What's it in Louisiana?
No, it's here in Mississippi, in Mississippi Delta.
Yeah, I'm not used to the actual system here. How has it been there at that time? This is the early, 80s, 90s?
Yeah, late 70s or early 80s. Parchment had just gone through a transition. Inmates had filed a lawsuit because of the conditions there. And
how were those conditions?
oh, they were horrible. They were horrible.
Paint a picture for
I mean, if you, before the lawsuit was passed, inmates had to pick 200 pounds of cotton a day.
Wow.
And there were consequences for not getting your
cotton like
yes, I'm
slave plantation?
Yes.
Cotton with the, see, I don't know on television now because I wasn't raised on
yeah,
it.
well, actually,
the stories that my mom used to talk about,
right.
having to pick cotton.
Parchment was actually, being called a prison was a misnomer. It was actually a prison farm.
Okay.
Because it was more agricultural based than anything else. You know, not like on TV where you have the walls and everybody's inside. The inmates would go out and they would till the fields, and most of the food they grew, they ate. And there was trying to make that transition from picking cotton, picking peas, to actually trying to do something else. There was not a whole lot of educational opportunities at the time. There was a vocational school. I think it only housed would only take in about 200 inmates, up to 2,200 or so that were there at the time. So a lot of inmates worked the fields, came back, worked the fields, came back, and the days become monotonous over and over and over. And an inmate would do, you do things to try and to make the time
There wasn't
easier.
no ramen noodles like they have the modern day times when your time about soups and going to commissary and trying to make all your books and all that.
No, they were commissaries at each unit, but you had to have money in order to get that. And unfortunately, a lot of inmates didn't have it. There was the parents or family members were not taking care of them, were not sending things, were not able to send them things. So a lot of them simply just had to survive on what was given by the penitentiary.
Yeah. I want to go more into going from getting life in prison and going on. So what happened between that point of 18 until now? What happened to make you free?
God stepped in. There was an inmate conceived program called Project Aware, and after about 7 years, I began to, I had grown up, and I had a certain reputation. I didn't really have to worry about anybody bothering me. So I began to do what I always wanted to do, which was study, to try to prepare myself for hopefully one day when I was released. But there was an inmate conceived program called Project Aware, and Project Aware was a juvenile crime prevention program, for lack of a better term. We would come out into the pre-world and would speak to schools, churches, or any organization that would invite us. And we would talk to the young people about, here's what happened, here's what it was like, and here's what it's like now being in Parchment. And it became one of the best juvenile crime prevention programs in the state of Mississippi. I was eventually allowed into that program. I was 20, 25, 26 at the time. And one day a tour came from what I think is the best HBCU in the whole wide world, Russ College.
Okay, about Russ College.
And a tour came from Russ College. I had never didn't have a girlfriend, of course, going to prison so early. And I decided that today I'm going to find me a girlfriend. A lot of the inmates had began to correspond with some of the young ladies they had met on the tour, or when they came out into the free world to talk. But I never did attempt that. I never believed that being incarcerated was a place to have a relationship. But I'm 25 now. Hormones have been building up. So I decided, well, if I'm ever going to know what it's like to be in love, to have a young lady to care something about me, it was going to have to be from behind prison walls. Prior to that visit, I had gone up for parole after 9 years or so, and had been given a year set out, which means that we're not going to let you go, but we'll reconsider you again next year. So when the tour came up from Rust, I said, okay, I need to find me a girlfriend. And you should have seen the pretty young ladies. I hadn't been around women, in over 10 years. So everything that got off the bus looked good to me. And when I thought the last person on the bus had gotten off, this elderly lady, Caucasian, got off the bus. I thought she was 105 years old if she was a day. And I knew then that my chance of finding a girlfriend was over. The other inmates in the tour group, don't get me wrong, I love them dearly, and they were good at what they did, but I knew they were not going to pay any attention to this elderly lady with all of these beautiful young ladies on the bus. So I told the tour director that she didn't have to worry about the old lady. I would be her personal tour guide. It turns out that this elderly lady was a retired school teacher from Rust College.
Oh, okay.
And at that particular time, I was at the top of my game intellectually. I had gone through, had gotten a GED, had completed a junior college course, and all I wanted to do was grow. So to have this retired school teacher, college professor, when she got on the bus, the first question was, what is it like being locked up? So I began to give her the standard answer. Well,
So what was it like being locked up? The reason why I'm asking this is to paint a picture, to try to get youth, try to get young adults, try to get for them to think before you react, before you do something. What was it like all those years at that point being locked up?
You get used to the physical aspect of being locked up relatively quickly. This is what you're going to do, and this is when you're going to do it, and that's the end of it. But what began to get most inmates, a lot of them didn't talk about it, we realized that we've made a mistake, and that life is going on all around us outside the institution, and I'm stuck on this 23,000 acres, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. To overcome the sadness and the depression, we have to, in essence, force ourselves to continue to go on day after day.
You never try to commit suicide, hurt yourself with depression? What helped you to that's a long time to serve and to have hope and faith. Because you're like a living witness to having that faith. From that 16-year-old to this 25-year-old, I'm kind of jumping ship, speeding up the process a little bit.
Okay.
But just trying to, what was your anchor? I'm sure you are a living, true hero. And the reason I say that is because you have to walk by faith and not by sight. Because you wake up, boom, still here.
Well, I don't consider myself a hero. I don't consider myself a role model. What I do is...
But you are. Because you know why?
Why, sir?
You talk, you walk the walk. You looking at yourself now back at that little 16-year-old, at your future self, and says, you know what? You admitted that you done wrong. You got predators every day that's living. They live in denial. Some of them die in denial and do not make amends to the ones they've hurt. You was willing at a young age, knew God. You question God, you had that past. That's why I say your life reminded me that of Moses. Because you at 16 years of age, despite what you say, hey, I did it, I admit to it, you was praying. Because at that point, you was like, Lord, you put all it's kind of like you open yourself up. Here you are now, a free man, and saying, hey, I talked the talk, I walked it. You letting your life. You have written how many people say, I'm going to write a book about my life. I hear it all the time. But you have a bestseller sitting right here in front of your hand and saying, hey, if there just be one person that's listening to me right now in the Jackson, Mississippi, the year started January 1st. Look at all the murders and all the killings. If you just tell one person right now under the sound of your voice, saying, hey, you don't want to go down this path. That's what you're doing. You didn't get no PPE loan from the government that's saying, hey, I want to start this mentoring program. That's what we do. I didn't get that. Being a business owner, my first employee, creating a space. That's what you're doing. Bavein House is going to support you. So that when we started talking,
Right.
support you, provide a space for the youth, having speakers when you have events. So God allows for things to happen for a reason.
Correct.
Your life is a testimony within itself. I was sexually abused as a child. So if you sit here telling your story and you're saying, hey, I'm not perfect, so you can't judge me. They're always talking, but they say you're a hero because it takes a true person to say, hey, I done wrong, I done my time. How can I let my life be a witness or testimony like Moses? Moses did a lot. He stuttered, he talked, but guess what? He still allowed, God was still able to use that. God able to use your life and what you went through and say, hey, I'm not that same person. But we get back from a commercial break, I want to talk about how it's been and trying to get a job and stuff like that.